My name is Meline Brennan. I've always been the dependable member of my family, the one who answers the phone when someone needs help and always steps in no matter what. It's been like this for as long as I can remember. Perhaps it's because I grew up in a family-oriented home. We didn't have much, only enough to keep the lights on and the food on the table, but we had each other. My parents worked hard, my mother working 2 jobs and my father working long days in construction, and there was me, the youngest of 4 children, constantly attempting to maintain peace in a house that was both loud and chaotic but also full of love. I learned how to fix things at a young age, whether it was assisting my brothers with their homework or listening to my sister complain about a boy who broke her heart. They turned to me. I didn't mind, I actually enjoyed it. I enjoyed being the person people could rely on to make things better. As I grew older, I carried that with me. I went to college, became a guidance counselor, and spent my days listening to others' problems. I enjoyed assisting them in determining their next steps. I thought I was very good at it. I thought that helping others was my purpose. Then my sister Chloe lost her husband. Jet was only 12 years old at the time, a young boy forced to mature far too quickly, and Chloe did her best, but losing her husband broke her. She needed someone to intervene, as did Jet, so I did. I did not think twice about it. He needed stability, and I could provide it for him. At first, it was simple things like picking him up from soccer practice, assisting him with his homework, and ensuring he had what he needed when Chloe couldn't, but it grew into more. I went to every game, school play, and parent-teacher conference. He called me when he was upset, and he relied on me when he needed to talk. I believed I was helping him and doing the right thing, but trust is a fragile thing. It takes years to build, but only a single moment, one decision, can completely destroy it. I didn't notice it at the time, perhaps because I didn't want to. I didn't want to admit the lines were blurring. Thought was love, support was something else entirely. This is the story of how I broke that trust, crossed inappropriate boundaries, and hurt someone I care deeply about. It is not a story I am proud to tell, but it is the truth, and if telling it makes even one person stop and think before repeating my mistakes, it may be worthwhile. Jet adored his mom, Chloe. She was his lifeline and anchor. She was the type of parent who made every opportunity count, constantly encouraging him at soccer games. She stayed up late to help him with projects and sat with him during thunderstorms because she knew he hated the sound of rain hitting the windows. They shared a rare and unbreakable bond, but life isn't about bonds, right? Chloe's life ended abruptly. She was driving home late at night after working a double shift in the hospital. She was tired from a long day, and now there was the drunk driver. He ran a red light and Chloe was gone in an instant. Jet was only 12 years old. I'll never forget that call. It was almost. At midnight, the phone rang loudly, startling me. When I answered, it was Curtis Clark, a family friend who had been contacted by police. His voice was trembling, and all he could say was, "She did not make it." My heart dropped, and all I could think about was Jet. What should I tell him? How do you explain to a boy that the person who was his entire world is not returning? Jet was sitting on the couch, knees pulled up to his chest, staring at the front door, as if waiting for her to walk in. He did not cry at first, but rather sat there, silent and lost. When I knelt in front of him and told him she had left, the light in his eyes dimmed. He didn't say anything, just collapsed into my arms and sobbed so hard that I thought he'd break. From that point forward, I became everything to Jet. His father had been gone for years, leaving when Jet was just a toddler. Chloe had raised him by herself, and now that she was gone, there was no one else. I stepped in because someone had to. He needed me, and I would not disappoint him. It started with the basics, providing him with food, clothing, and a safe place to sleep, but it quickly grew to include much more. Jet was in grief and had no idea how to deal with it. He stopped communicating with his friends, his grades suffered, and he became a shadow of the boy he once was. He was angry, too angry at the world, angry at the driver who took his mother, and possibly even angry at her for abandoning him, as his father had done. He finally spoke up one night, about 6 months after Chloe's death. I was assisting him with his math homework when he suddenly exclaimed, "It's not fair." She was everything I had. His voice cracked, and he looked at me with tears in his eyes. Why did she have to leave? What did I do wrong? Hearing those words broke my heart. I wanted to tell him that it wasn't his fault, that the world can be cruel at times, but I knew those words wouldn't be enough, so I did the only thing I could. I wrapped my arms around him and said, "I'm here. You are not alone." My cousin Curtis and I went to every soccer game, helped him with every school project, and made sure he knew he was loved, but I wasn't Chloe, and maybe that's where the cracks began. Jet relied on me for everything, from deciding what to wear for picture day to asking for help with school problems, and he even began skipping outings with his friends to spend more time with me. He's leaning on you for everything. Curtis didn't understand what Jet had been through, and he didn't see how much Jet needed me, but looking back now, I realize he was right. I wasn't just helping Jet, I was holding on to him too tightly, trying to be everything for him because I didn't know how to let go, and in doing so, I blurred lines that should never have been blurred. I didn't see it then, but cracks were already forming, cracks in Jet's ability to grow, cracks in my judgment, cracks in when he turned 15, I began to notice a shift in him, his voice deepened, his frame broadened, and the quiet shy boy I'd spent years protecting was gradually becoming someone new, someone I didn't fully recognize. It should have made me proud, and in some ways it did, but it also terrified me. He was growing up, pulling away from the safe little world we'd built together, and I didn't know where that would leave me. At first, it'd the door when he used to leave it open. He laughed at my jokes, less brushed off my offers to help with his homework, and spent hours scrolling on his phone instead of talking to me like he used to. I told myself it was normal, that all teenagers go through phases like this, but it didn't stop the ache in my chest every time he chose solitude over my company. Then he met Scarlett Larson. She was a classmate of his, bright, outgoing, and effortlessly charming in that way, only 15 years old. The other sentence was about something funny Scarlett had said in class about how good she was at soccer. And for the first time in years, he seemed genuinely happy, and I should have been happy for him, but instead, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach every time her name came up. It feels like I'm losing him. I confided in Curtis one afternoon when he stopped by for coffee, and Curtis gave me a long, thoughtful look before responding, "Meline, that's a good." I didn't say it out loud, but I didn't agree. I couldn't imagine a version of my life where Jet didn't need me. I didn't know who I was without him. The first time it happened, it was an accident, or so I told myself. Jet had stayed up late working on a project for school, and I found him asleep on the couch, papers scattered around him. I went to drape a blanket over him, but this time I hesitated. His shirt had ripped. I felt a rush of guilt that made my chest tighten, but I ignored it, tucked him in, and went to bed. It was small, fleeting instances that seemed harmless at the time but added up to something much bigger. A touch on his shoulder that lingered a beat too long, a compliment that felt a little too personal. I convinced myself that I was just being affectionate, but deep down I couldn't stop staring at him. His face was flushed, his hair damp, and there was something about the way he looked at me, so open, so trusting, that made my heart race. I don't know what happened to me. One minute we were laughing, and the next I was leaning in and kissing him. It was quick. His eyes were wide with surprise, and for a moment I thought he was going to pull away, but he didn't. He moved steadily to me with his eyes almost piercing through mine. "What are we doing?" he asked, and before I could utter a word, he held my waist and drew close to him, his succulent lips pressed against mine before we could realize what was happening. I was lying flat on the floor with Jet on top of me, and he unblocked his belt with haste while I peeled my pants off. I moaned so loudly and held him tightly as he caressed my left thigh and slowly moved his fingers to my waist while kissing and licking my neck. It was my greatest experience with Jet. Yes, it was wrong. I was wrong. I should have stopped us, but I couldn't resist him at that moment. After that, everything changed. We told ourselves it wasn't wrong, that it didn't hurt anyone if no one knew, but the truth was that it was wrong. I knew it, and I believe Jet did as well. Jet and his best friend, Bryson Blackwell, had met at school a few months after our affair and had started confiding in him. Bryson Blackwell was the kind of kid who was wise beyond his years, always offering advice that seemed far too mature for a 16-year-old. Jet trusted him maybe even more than he trusted me, and I could tell it was starting to weigh on him. One evening, I overheard them talking in his room. "I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, I don't know what to do," Jet said, his voice low and frustrated. "It's like I can't stop, but I don't even know if I want it anymore." "What do you mean?" Bryson inquired. "I mean, it's too much. I feel as if I no longer know who I am. She's always there, doing everything. I can't breathe." There was a long pause before Bryson responded. "You need to tell her. Tell her you need some space. This is not healthy, Jet. Do you know that?" "I can't," Jet exclaimed, his voice cracking. "I do not want to hurt her. She is all I have, Bryson." Jet and I had been at odds for a while, but I refused to acknowledge it. He was spending more and more time in his room, either alone or with Bryson and Scarlett. Hearing those words felt like a punch in the gut, and I realized I wasn't just hurting myself, I was also hurting Jet, and I didn't know how to stop. I reassured myself that it was just a phase and that he would return to me as he always did, but deep down I could feel the distance growing, which terrified me. One night, I was scrolling through photos on my phone, looking for pictures of Jet from when he was younger, when everything seemed simpler, and I came across one from his 13th birthday, where he was smiling at the camera with cake smeared across his face. I recall thinking about how much had changed, how much I had given him, and how much I needed Jet to give me a look I had never seen before. He'd come home from school and say only 2 words to me before leaving to meet her. One night, he mentioned that she had invited him to a party over the weekend, and all I could think was panic. "Are you certain that's a good idea?" I asked, trying to maintain a neutral tone. "Parties at your age can become out of control." "I'm just looking out for you," I explained quietly. He sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. "I understand, but it feels like I don't. I need to go see you in the morning." Jet had just returned from hanging out with Bryson, and I could tell something was wrong. He barely looked at me as he walked past, straight to his room. I followed him, lightly knocking on the door and pushing it open. I couldn't sleep because his words kept running through my head. I knew he was right, and I'd been holding on to it. "I'm not sure how to tell you this, but I couldn't say no" while he sat on the edge of his bed, head in his hands. When he finally looked up at me, his eyes were filled with something I couldn't identify, hurt, anger, or perhaps even fear. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low and steady. My stomach dropped. "Okay," I said, sitting in the chair across from him. "What's happening?" He took a deep breath, and for a moment I thought he might change his mind, but then he spoke, and his words hit me like a punch in the gut. "I've been doing this to you for a long time," he said, his voice shaking. "It feels like I don't have a choice, and it's killing me." I looked at him, stunned. "I do not understand." He looked away, his jaw tightening. "I've been trying to figure out for months why I feel this way, why I keep doing things I don't want to do, and I believe it's because I don't want to disappoint you, but I can't do it anymore." His words hung in the air, heavy and oppressive. I wanted to tell him it was consensual, but deep down I knew he was correct. I had crossed lines that should never have been crossed, and now I was watching the fallout in real time. After he left the room, I sat there for what seemed like hours, replaying the conversation in my head. How did I let it get this far? How had I convinced myself that what I was doing was fine? The weight of it all was unbearable, and I knew I couldn't do it alone any longer. The next day, I called Rebecca Pina and said, "You can't repair this unless you accept full responsibility." "I know," I said softly, tears streaming down my cheeks. "You can't fix it overnight," she explained, "but the first step is to let Jet go. He needs time to figure out who he is without you," and you were like a slap in the face, but she was right. I hated myself for turning the poor boy into someone he didn't want to be. Jet let me know a few days later that he needed some space. He claimed he was not angry, but he needed time to think and process everything. Hearing those words crushed me, but I knew they were necessary. As much as it hurt, I had to let him go. I spent days mentally repeating Jet's words until they felt etched in my bones. I'm not sure how to tell you this, but I felt like I couldn't say no to you for quite some time. Each time the weight of what I had done grew heavier, suffocating me for years, I convinced myself that what we shared was mutual, that I was helping him and loving him in the way he needed, but now all I could see was how much I had hurt him. I wanted to make things right, but whenever I tried to contact them, I froze. What could I say to ease the pain I had caused? Every word felt inadequate, like trying to fix a broken dam with a piece of tape. I realized I couldn't just leave things as they were. Jet deserved an apology, but he also deserved to hear me accept responsibility, so I wrote him a letter. Dear Jet, I don't even know where to start. How do I start apologizing for something I can't even fully explain to myself? All I know is that I have hurt you in ways I never intended, and for that, I sincerely apologize. When your mother died, I promised myself that I would protect you no matter what I thought I was doing, but somewhere along the way, I lost that promise, and in doing so, I took away something I will never get back, your trust. You said you couldn't say no to me, which broke my heart because I never wanted you to feel trapped, as if you didn't have any options. I can't change what happened, but I can promise you that from now on, I'll respect your boundaries. I'll give you the space you need to figure out who you are without me hovering over you. I'm not asking for forgiveness because I don't deserve it, however, I hope that one day you'll be able to look back on the good times we shared and realize that, even though I failed you in so many ways, I always loved you. Jet, I'm so sorry about everything. Love, Aunt Meline. I put the letter on his desk one morning while he was out with Bryson. I wasn't expecting a response right away, but the wait was unbearable. Every time my phone rang, my heart raced, only to drop when I realized it wasn't him. Days turned into weeks, but nothing changed. I began to wonder if I'd lost him permanently. Then one evening, there came a knock on the door. I opened it to find Jet standing there, looking much older than his 19 years. He held the letter in his hand, folded and creased as if he had read it 100 times. For a moment, we just stared at each other, unsure what to say. Can we talk? He finally asked, his tone low and steady. I nodded and moved aside to let him in. We sat in the living room, the silence stretching out before us like a canyon. Eventually, he broke it. He said, staring at the letter, I've been thinking a lot about us and everything, and I'm not sure if things will ever return to normal. His words stung, but I knew they were right. I don't expect them to, I admitted quietly. I just want you to know that I'm available for whatever you require, be it space, time, or nothing at all. I'll respect it. He looked up at me, and for the first time in what seemed like an eternity, I recognized the boy I once knew in his eyes. I'm willing to rebuild, he said, but it will take time. That's all I could ever ask for, I said, my voice breaking slightly. We sat down for a while. Not saying much, just sharing space in a tentative but hopeful way. It wasn't a resolution, it was more of a start, fragile and uncertain but real. I'd like to say that concludes the story, but I'm not sure what happens next. I'm still trying to figure out how I got here and how to proceed. I know I've made terrible mistakes, and I'm not sure if they can ever be undone, but I want to try for Jet, for myself, and for the chance to be. Now I'm turning to you. What do you do if you've harmed someone you love? How do you make up for something so terrible? I do not know the answers, but perhaps you do. What would you do if you found yourself in a similar situation, or even if you hadn't? How would you fix it? Please leave your thoughts in the comments section. I'm here to learn, listen, and grow, and if this story moved you or made you think, please like this video before you leave. It not only lets me know you are present, but it also helps. This story has the potential to reach people who would benefit from hearing it. If you believe someone in your life would benefit from this discussion, please share this video with them and remember to subscribe. This is not the end of my journey, and I want you to be a part of it as we move forward. Thank you for being present and taking part in this discussion. Your thoughts and insights are more valuable than you realize.